welcome to the Story Cafe. Today our guest is Amy Oestreicher from Connecticut and soon to be New York. Amy is a performer, a storyteller, a health advocate, an artist, and an award-winning playwright and actress. We have lots to talk about today. Welcome, Amy.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, I'm delighted you're here. I know you took a few modes of transportation to get here, so I appreciate it. Thank you. I've been delighted to go through your blogs and your TED Talks and all of the different things you have online to learn more about you. And I have to say, I am just blown away with how much you do. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you have this wonderful blog, and you call yourself a detourist, and other people guest write for you about their detours in life. So tell me, did you coin that phrase, and what does that mean?
Well, I came up with the term detours and describing what I had been through as a detour because I had been through so much in such a condensed amount of time. If my TED Talk is about that, there's stuff on my website. I don't need to go into that now, but a lot of traumas turned the life that I planned for myself onto a completely different route, and I didn't really know how to classify that for myself. It was basically, my life as a high school teenager turned around overnight, and I woke up in a hospital and was about to go to college, and then it was like, what do I do from here? And so I guess I realized that being a detourist not only means that your path is totally diverted, but you stay open to that path, and no matter what is ahead, you just put one step in front of the other, and just see, to the next day. And slowly, you don't find the meaning from a detour right away. In my TED Talk, it was like finding the flower from your detour.
Yes.
But it can take years. But the point is, you don't ever get to that point unless you just go one day at a time. So that's how the term evolved.
A great piece of advice. And you mentioned your TED Talk, so I'm going to jump ahead for a second. I was watching one of your TED Talks, and I really loved what you were doing with the flowers. As you spoke about each challenge, there became a flower that you put into the vase. And I thought that was such a wonderful way to highlight those different paths you had in life. And I noticed at the end, you started to walk off stage, and then you came back and you smelled the bouquet of flowers.
Yeah, that was an impulse.
Was that impulse?
Yeah, I'm an actress, and I'm a stage ham. So for me, it's just kind of funny that I fell into speaking, because it's all one big stage to me. So I've been touring my one-woman musical for 6 years, and it's kind of the same show, but at this point I'm just like, hey audience, let's just have a party. So I guess this TED stage was no different.
Well, it just reminded me, because your talk was about your challenges, but also learning how to embrace the changes, and it made me think, as you were putting the flowers in, that old quote, take time to stop and smell the roses, and then you went and did that at the end. I thought, brilliant, just brilliant. And now I find out it was spontaneous, so even more brilliant. So thank you for sharing that piece with me.
Yeah.
Now, you share your story in many different ways with people, because it was really transformative. It transformed your life, and I do urge the audience to go to Amy's website and see and read about the transformations you've faced. How is sharing your story, how has it transformed you?
Oh, I mean, it's the reason why why I became functional, after my life kind of just went out of order for a bit. First of all, I grew up like a creative powerhouse. My first memory of getting into trouble was getting sent to the principal's office because the teacher left the room and I started tap dancing on her. I was always, artsy and creative, and that was always how I communicated. So I think when I was discharged from the hospital and had no roadmap, I just started, writing, dancing, singing, whatever I could do. But all of that for 10 years, I think what people don't realize, because I'm kind of like all over the place now, for 10 years, I was just in my room doing all this to myself, just writing stories and singing, and I thought that was, healing me and moving me forward. But I didn't realize until I actually found the courage and the words to share my story in public, which was through my one-woman musical, Gutless and Grateful. That was when I realized, wow, healing happens in community. Not only do we have to share our story for ourselves, but our story takes on a completely new meaning when we share it with others, because suddenly it wasn't just, the tunnel vision of, I'm telling my story, I'm getting out on my laptop or in my paintings. It was, I'm sharing a story of adversity, of detours, of pain, but of also finding the gifts of that. And suddenly my personal narrative turned into this universal narrative that others could relate to. And to have people come up to me and say, I haven't been through what you have, but I could totally relate when you were really frustrated here and all that. That's the magic cure for any healing from any kind of trauma, feeling that empathy.
Connection.
So I think, sharing our story and feeling like others can relate to us, that's what gets rid of stigma, that gets rid of shame we don't even know we're holding.
Very good point.
And I really attribute my show as the final step, or a great step in my healing process, just because other people could finally relate, and it wasn't like Amy, the outcast from society, sharing this crazy, unique Ripley's Believe It or Not story, but
But it does sound like that, I must say.
Right, but for me it became, okay, this is a story that other people have too, and I finally felt part of the human race again.
That is so wonderful that you have been able to come through that kind of trauma and turned it into something so positive and so affirming, not just for yourself, but for other people as well. One of the things you've also said when I was reading a lot of your work, you also say it's important to think like an artist. And I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I also know that you just graduated from college, and your final project was on oral history, and you're bringing, or are bringing for us today, a wonderful story of your grandmother. Would you share that with us now?
Sure.
Wonderful, thank you.
This is my grandma's robe. Whenever I think of my grandma, I think of her in this robe by her kitchen stove, always cooking, never eating, the best looking noodle pudding, the best tasting marrow from the best smelling chicken soup, which was the best cure for anything. Always food. It's how we knew my grandma was here. Our mouths were stocked with food, our fridge was stocked with leftovers. It's how us Jews show we care. So for a 7th grade health project, our assignment was to do a good deed for someone else. And my grandma always said, you have to celebrate when the times are good. So I decided to give back to my grandma and celebrate. Helene? Hi, Helene was my mom's college roommate, and she grew up with my mom and bonded in Brooklyn over their mutual Barbra Streisand obsession. I'm gonna throw a surprise birthday party for my grandma. Can you? Yeah, bring food, lots of food. She will love that. I called every relative I had in Connecticut and every neighbor on our block. Hannah Stochel was everyone's grandma. So 20 friends and family waited around our kitchen table, waiting for my mom to bring my grandma in through the kitchen. Okay, everyone, 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to... Amy, please stop. I took my camcorder and I zoomed in around her tiny brown eyes with those cute little wrinkles. I zoomed in on a tear. I'm sorry, Amela, I can't. My friends aren't here to celebrate with me. They all died in the war, and I wonder, why me? Why am I still alive? She stood there and and looked at all of us and thanked us for coming. But our words, our song, our appetite for kosher cookies, it was taken away in a heartbeat. Now celebration wasn't a happy word. It was a painful reminder of a world that she could never get back. One word became a whole world. What else was in my grandma's world that I didn't know? So soon I started to put together enough words to make a story. And this was the story I heard. My grandma, Hannah Stochel, was blonde and brown-eyed, 18 years old in Czechoslovakia, had just married the love of her life when she was separated from her family and taken by the Nazis to the death camps of Auschwitz. She was an amazing seamstress, and she survived because the Nazis forced her to sew their uniforms. She was in the camps the year they were liberated, and a soldier said, "You're free," and she didn't know what that meant. Miraculously, she found the rest of her 8 siblings and found out her older brother had died, and so had her husband. She reunited with whoever else was left and immigrated to Ellis Island on a ship that left her with this mysterious fear of water for the rest of her life. My grandma was afraid of shoes for the rest of her life too, and my mom remembers shoes being thrown at her. She remembers my grandmother never wanting her feet covered when she was sleeping. She remembered that my grandmother loved talking about her first husband, even in front of my grandpa. My grandmother loved her soap operas at 12:30 every day. My grandmother married my grandfather, Irving Stochel. They met on Delancey Street after she had just come off the ship. He was a big tailor and fought as a partisan in Poland. And they went on to establish a huge sewing business in the Lower East Side, living out the American dream and sewing for all the big department stores of the day. This is the last picture I have with my grandma. We were celebrating when the times were good. It was Passover, April 25th, 2005. See how she's reaching out to me? I was 18, the same age that my grandma's life changed overnight. That night, I was rushed to the emergency room with a stomachache that wouldn't go away. My grandparents were sent home in a cab in the middle of the night. And when I woke up from a coma months later, I learned that both of my grandparents had passed away. 27 surgeries later and 6 years not able to eat or drink anything, I couldn't remember what my grandma's lemon bars tasted like, and I couldn't remember how to have faith in anything. I wanted to know what was in my grandma's world that we couldn't see. How did she rebuild this whole life for herself after her world had been taken apart, like mine? So I asked my relatives. My grandma had a younger brother, Morris, and Morris had 4 kids who were my aunts and uncles. They had to know something. So I asked Uncle David, "You're not going to find anything." You know, I was trying to write a book, so I asked my dad, and I reached out to everyone in my family, and nobody knows anything about this story. It's really frustrating. Okay, that was just one brother. I asked his brother, Uncle Jeffrey, do you remember anything about my grandfather, my grandmother? You know, my dad, Morris, he kind of claims he remembers a few isolated stories, but the truth is he tells them so many times, who knows what's true anymore? Okay, girls are more sentimental. I had 2 aunts. Aunt Janie, do you remember my grandma? Do you remember any memories of her? What did your dad say? Morris? Morris is not the emotional type. Let me tell you something. I think it's because he had such a weird childhood. You know, I was out there visiting him in Florida for a week, and the entire time, he just played bridge. Didn't say a word to me. It's weird, but it's kind of the way he's been. Okay, 3 down. I had one more aunt. Aunt Cheryl, did Uncle Morris ever tell you anything about my grandmother? Your grandma? I mean, my dad always talked about how he loved her lemon bars, but, you know, it's like the telephone game. Everyone knows a little bit of something and a lot of bit of nothing. Okay, maybe Morris was a dead end. Mom, Mom, when did Grandma tell you that she was a Holocaust survivor? Amy, I don't know. I always knew it. It was just a fact. What do you mean it's a fact, Mom? Like, your eyes are blue is a fact. Knowing Grandma was a Holocaust survivor, you had to find out sometime. I mean, what did she tell you? Amy, if you want to remember your grandmother, why don't we just sit down and watch Fiddler on the Roof? But I didn't give up. I tracked down relatives from all over the world, from 7 different countries. I conducted hundreds of hours of oral history interviews. I transcribed hundreds of pages of oral histories just to hear their story. And I did find that everyone knew a little bit of something. And just like my grandmother had weaved together fabrics for her survival, I was somehow piecing together the family narrative. I dug up something even more valuable than history. I found memories, I found stories, and one day I found an email from my Uncle Morris. Amy, my daughter Cheryl said you wanted to know about your grandmother. Her lemon bars, that's all I remember, and they still make me drool every time I think about them. You know, she was also an amazing baker and sewer. I credit her for my snazzy fashion sense. She was the right arm for our family. I will continue, tomorrow though, because my tears blind me. And Morris was already blind in the other eye. So for the next year, I sent him questions and he left me hours of voicemails, and I transcribed hundreds of more pages. A year later, I formed an amazing relationship with an uncle I've still never met. And to this day, he sends me voicemails, and this is the latest. My dear Amy, I'm sorry for the delay this time. I've been out of the house playing bridge. But here are the answers to your latest questions. You asked me how your grandma made me feel. Besides her lemon bars, which always make my mouth water every time I think of them, I remember that she always loved me and made me feel important. And it was your grandma that gave me that confidence that I always have. Number 2, different. I can't even imagine how my life would be different without the war and all those millions who perished and were tortured. It's always been a puzzlement to me, how I survived. I was such a sick child, and so many of my friends didn't survive, or my oldest brother. Now, everyone's gone, except myself. Number 3, you asked my view of heaven. Being together with family who have passed away, and still getting the care that I remember from them. When I look at old pictures of my family, I just remember how special they made me feel. And I don't know if I ever told them. I'm sorry I didn't. Number 4, what would Grandma be like today? She would have been proud to see you, Amy, and that you have survived your own ordeal as she has survived hers. And so happy now that you're finding all of this information for her and connecting our family, like threading fibers, like your grandma. I feel like as long as we carry our loved ones in our heart, they are never truly gone. We can never imagine the excruciating pain and suffering she was forced to endure. We've all pictured it and know her stories, and we think we know, but we don't. For example, my own life story is difficult for even me to believe. From a small town in Europe, we came to the greatest country in the world, and we've been blessed with grandchildren and so many others in the fields of human endeavors, touching so many lives, like you are, as we go along the way. What we learn from your grandma most is to carry on and do the right thing and set a good example for others to follow. I think that's the best way to honor her legacy. I think that's the story you should tell. And I hope one day you do try to write a book with my son. And whatever I can tell you, I will, as long as I remember the stories. Anyway, I hope this information is useful. I'll try to tell you more tomorrow. But after my bridge competition next week, I'm up for Life Master. Wish me luck. Thank you for listening, Morris. My Aunt Janie was right. Morris did love bridge, but this was a bridge from a word to another world. So thank you, Morris, for teaching me how to play.
Thank you for that story, Amy. That was really moving. And you talked in your story that you were sharing about your grandmother, about how people are remembered when you tell their stories. And it reminded me of an old African proverb. It's an old folk tale at the end of an African folk tale, and it says, no one is ever gone as long as their name is spoken. So that resonated with me.
A word becomes a world.
Absolutely. That's what it was. A word becomes the
In
world.
the Mayan creation myth, you know, like first there was the word.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for that. And now I know that from that story, you have created another show, Fibers, and then also a second from that piece, which will be called Factory Treasures. So when will those be ready for people to see?
Well, you know, you mentioned it, I graduated college at 30, and talk about detours, you know, I just happened to take an oral history course. And I was going to do this project of, you know, I want to research my grandmother. And I really got so much pushback from all my relatives saying that, you know, nobody knows anything. But that was the beauty, you know, finding that memory can be stirred up and can be threaded together like fibers. So I really transcribed about 400 pages of oral history interviews, which I conducted, and I got to know relatives I didn't even know I had that I still haven't met. Like a shout out to my great uncle Izzy in Belgium.
Oh, Belgium.
Belgium,
Wonderful.
Israel, you know, everywhere. San Francisco, you know, everywhere. And so what I ended up with was, you know, someone who really inspires me as a theater artist, you know, Anna Devere Smith, who made a documentary-style drama, like verbatim theater. The Laramie Project's another example.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
and I just studied with the Tectonic Theater Project. You know, so basically I had all of these interviews, and I put together a 90-minute script called Fibers, not just because of, you know, my grandma's sewing, but because I was like, you know, weaving all these together. And in this piece, Fibers, I'm embodying 12 different family members with these monologues that are really inspired by the interviews, you know, all about coming to this, wanting to know my grandmother's story, but coming away with so much more. Like a big shout out to Uncle Morris in Florida.
I feel like I know Uncle
we
Morris
all feel
already.
like Morris is like Morris, we love you. Play more bridge and be that life master. I'll have to stay updated on that.
Yes.
But anyway, it's been amazing to give voice to my relatives. And then the other play, Factory Treasure, is based on, you know, my grandma Hannah, my grandpa Irving. They really did become amazing and successful. A seamstress and tailor. They set up the Myra Corporation on Ditmas Ave. And so this play for 4 actors is loosely based on their story and goes into like gentrification in Brooklyn about like when a family has this huge legacy behind them and this factory with all these fabrics and memories, you know, what do they do with it now? So it's in development now. I have a great director, and stay tuned for a production date.
Oh, it sounds so fascinating and so rich, really, really
And I
rich.
must tell you, the biggest reward for me is being able to, you know, the hardest part really was waking up from my coma and realizing I'd never see my grandparents again.
So
and
sad.
and I miss them. You know, my life was changed overnight, and I look for any anchor to my childhood that really feel, you know, I never saw my childhood home again, my childhood dogs, you know, all that. So, you know, I never got that closure, but finally, for me, it really does feel like I can feel them, you know, blessing all of this. And, you know, I think it's done my family a lot of good, too. So.
Well, it's just amazing to me that through adversity, all this good has come. And you've really taken it on where there are others that wouldn't. And you are truly making the world a much brighter and better place by sharing your story. And I know you already have, you've done TED Talk already, and you have another one coming out this week that was filmed a little while ago. Mm-hmm. So share a little bit about that.
I mean, this is why I'm still here. You know, again, I had no roadmap coming out of the hospital. I couldn't eat or drink. I didn't have a stomach. And I think it was a benefit to me that I didn't know a thing about psychology. I didn't know what post-traumatic stress disorder was, even though I was a walking case of that. All I had literally was a book of mythology and a book of stories. And somehow I discovered Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey. And so once I started reading it, I had such a naive, primal view of healing, because it wasn't like, oh, I'm dealing with all this PTSD and what do I do? It was, oh no, I'm on step 6 of the hero's journey. I'm like in the darkness. And so not only that, but it gave me a roadmap. Then I could just write stories using each one of Joseph Campbell's steps. And through writing these hundreds of pages of stories, I mean, I went through like 7 backup drives and made these great stories that I'm still developing a full-length musical about. I made like 500 business cards that said Tiger Lily Professional Warrior just for myself, and I pretended I was a hero on an adventure. And my TED talks about how, we can turn trauma, and I don't want to say this lightly, but into an exciting adventure. And that doesn't always mean a good, fun time, but it means we can really invest ourselves in it. And the more we invest ourselves in that trauma and go ahead with it, I think we can come out with, definitely not a victimized attitude and a lot of gifts and feel strong. And so that's what the TED Talk is. I go into what I call my 4 hardcore skills to resilience, which I give presentations on all the time. But they're really just basic skills that we all have. Because the last thing I have to say is, everyone always wonders once they hear my story, how'd you make it through all that?
Absolutely.
And the truth is, I was just a kid like anyone else, and these are really basic skills that all of us have. And you mentioned thinking like an artist. Well, that's as simple as it is. It's the most effective thing you can do. Yeah.
Well, the TED Talk will be up hopefully next week or this week, correct?
Yep. It was TEDx at VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University.
So folks can just go to Google and YouTube your name, TEDx, and they'll find you. And I know that if they Google your name, they'll find other wonderful things that they can watch as well.
Or see my show.
Yes. Come see your show. Are you move that around a little bit?
I've been performing Gutless and Grateful, my one-woman musical, for 6 years now, all over the country, and not only for theaters. I do it for conferences and a lot of schools, and I mean, because who can't relate to their life turning overnight? So
please share your website so people can find you.
Yeah. My name, amyoes.com, and there's way too much stuff in there, but so spend some time clicking on things and you'll get to things. And if you're looking for something you don't see, send me a note and I guarantee it's on there.
Wonderful.
I write too much because it's how I survive.
Thank you for joining us today,
Thank
Amy.
you.
It's been a great pleasure, and thank you for joining us on the Story Cafe.
Thank you guys too.